I stood outside the enormous glass building with frozen fingers wrapped around a worn folder, watching people in expensive coats rush through the revolving doors without even noticing the snow gathering on my boots. Moscow always looked beautiful from a distance. Up close, it was a city that taught you how invisible an ordinary person could become. That morning I wasn't there because of my own dream. I was there because of my father. His name was Ivan Sokolov, a single father, a man who had spent 24 years raising me alone after my mother died during a harsh winter when I was only 3 years old. And now, at 53, after losing the factory job that had fed us for decades, he was standing in line to apply for a position as a janitor. I never imagined that writing his name on a simple application would make one of the richest men in Russia stop breathing for several seconds. Neither did my father. Neither did I. 3 hours earlier, my father had quietly ironed the only white shirt he still owned. The cuffs were slightly frayed. The collar had been repaired by my own hands more times than I could count. He looked into the cracked mirror inside our tiny apartment and smiled. I still look respectable, don't I, Katya? I forced myself to smile back. You always do, Papa. He laughed softly. Good. A janitor should at least look neat. He said it as a joke, but I knew how much those words hurt. Once upon a time, Ivan Sokolov had supervised hundreds of workers in one of Novosibirsk's largest engineering factories. People respected him. Young employees asked him for advice. His office had overlooked the entire production floor. Then foreign contracts disappeared. The factory downsized. Management changed. Older employees were the first to leave. My father searched for work for almost 2 years. Every interview ended the same way. You have excellent experience. We'll call you. They never called. Age had quietly become a crime. The savings disappeared. Then the furniture. Then my father's wedding ring. He sold it without telling me. I only realized after noticing the pale circle around his finger. He smiled when I asked. I haven't worn it in years. He lied terribly. I knew why he had done it. It paid my university tuition for another semester. That ring had been the last gift my mother ever gave him. He never admitted how painful it was to let it go. When I suggested leaving university to work full-time, he became angry for the first time in my life. You will graduate. But, no. His voice trembled. I promised your mother. That ended the discussion forever. So there we were, standing in front of Volkov International Holdings, one of Russia's largest investment companies. The company was hiring janitors after opening a new office tower. The salary wasn't impressive, but it included medical insurance. To my father, that meant dignity. Inside, applicants filled every chair in the waiting area. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked desperate. A young receptionist smiled politely. Application. My father nodded. She handed him several forms. He sat beside me and carefully filled every line using his old fountain pen. Name: Ivan Nikolaevich Sokolov. Age: 53. Previous occupation: factory operations manager. Reason for applying: seeking stable employment. He paused there, then quietly wrote 3 more words. Ready to work. I watched his handwriting. Even after decades, every letter remained elegant. The receptionist collected the applications into a stack. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just paper. Paper that would unexpectedly reopen a chapter someone had buried 28 years earlier. On the top floor of the building, Billionaire CEO Dmitry Volkov was ending a board meeting. Financial reports, acquisitions, expansion. Everything was proceeding according to schedule. Then Human Resources entered with several folders. We've received over 300 applications for support staff. Dmitry signed documents without looking. Approve whoever meets the requirements. His assistant placed another folder beside him. One applicant has unusual qualifications. Dmitry frowned. A former factory operations manager applying for janitorial work. He opened the application almost absent-mindedly. Then his hand froze. Ivan Nikolaevich Sokolov. The pen slipped from his fingers. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. His face lost color. Board members exchanged confused glances. Dmitry. He stared at the name again. His lips barely moved. No. His voice sounded almost frightened. It can't be him. He abruptly stood. Where is this applicant? The HR director blinked. Still downstairs, most likely. Bring him here. Sir. Interviews haven't started. I said bring him here. Nobody had heard Dmitry Volkov raise his voice in years. The room emptied within moments. Downstairs, my father was telling me another one of his terrible jokes. If they reject me, perhaps I'll apply to clean trains. I laughed despite myself. Then two security officers approached. Mr. Ivan Sokolov. My father immediately stood. Yes. The CEO would like to see you. The waiting room became silent. Several applicants looked jealous. Others looked confused. My father whispered to me. Perhaps I filled something incorrectly. We followed the officers upstairs. The elevator felt colder than the winter outside. When the doors opened, luxurious carpets stretched across polished marble floors. I had never seen anything like it. An assistant opened enormous wooden doors. The CEO will see you now. Inside stood Dmitry Volkov. Tall, silver-haired, perfectly tailored suit. Powerful, confident. Yet the moment he looked at my father, everything changed. The billionaire's eyes filled with emotions I couldn't understand. My father looked equally confused. They stared at each other for almost 20 seconds. Then Dmitry whispered, Ivan. My father frowned. I'm sorry. He leaned closer. Then his eyes widened. Dima? Neither man moved. Then, to everyone's complete astonishment, Russia's billionaire CEO walked across the room and embraced the janitor applicant. Not politely, not formally, like someone who had found a brother he believed dead. I had never seen my father speechless. Neither had anyone else. When they finally stepped apart, Dmitry laughed through tears. You haven't changed. My father looked around in disbelief. I've changed completely. No. Dmitry shook his head. Not where it matters. I remained frozen near the doorway. Nobody explained anything. Finally, my father looked toward me. Katya, this is Dmitry. He smiled. My first apprentice. Dmitry corrected him immediately. My first teacher. The room fell silent again. Later that afternoon, over tea neither man touched, I learned a story my father had hidden for almost 3 decades. When Dmitry was 22, he had been an angry young mechanic in my father's factory. Brilliant. Talented. Impossible. He argued with supervisors. Ignored instructions. Nearly lost his job 6 different times. Everyone wanted him fired. Everyone except my father. I saw something, Papa said quietly. He reminded me of myself. Dmitry smiled. He saw more than that. He turned toward me. I came from nothing. His parents had died within months of each other. He slept in a dormitory, worked double shifts, sometimes skipped meals. One evening, after everyone else left, my father found him repairing broken equipment instead of going home. Why aren't you leaving? Dmitry answered honestly. I don't have electricity where I live. So he stayed at work until morning. My father never forgot that answer. Without telling anyone, he began bringing extra lunches, not announcing they were gifts. Pretending Elena, my mother, had packed too much food. Dmitry always knew the truth. He accepted anyway. Months later, when management wanted to dismiss him after another argument, my father defended him. If you fire him, Papa told the directors, you're throwing away the best engineer in this factory. They laughed, but Papa refused to sign the dismissal papers. Instead, he personally mentored Dmitry for 5 years. Eventually, Dmitry left to start his own company. They promised to stay in touch. Life interrupted. Factories closed. Cities changed. Phone numbers disappeared. Years became decades. I searched for you, Dmitry admitted. But the factory records were destroyed. Papa smiled. I assumed you'd forgotten. Dmitry looked genuinely hurt. Forgotten? He slowly stood. I built half of my career because one man believed I deserved another chance. His voice became quieter. And today that same man applies to clean my floors. No one spoke. My father lowered his eyes. Work is work. Dmitry nodded. You're right. Then he picked up the application. He stared at the line reading ready to work. His eyes glistened. Ivan, you were willing to clean my offices. Papa smiled gently. There is no shame in honest work. Dmitry closed the folder. There never was. The news somehow spread throughout headquarters before sunset. Employees whispered in elevators. Executives looked stunned. The legendary founder had hugged a janitor applicant. Nobody understood why. The following morning, Dmitry called an emergency leadership meeting. I sat beside my father because Dmitry insisted. The boardroom was packed. Executives expected an acquisition announcement. Instead, Dmitry placed my father's application in the center of the table. This document, he said, reveals a problem far greater than recruitment. Nobody interrupted. He continued. We celebrate innovation. We celebrate loyalty. But yesterday, I nearly hired the man who taught me leadership as a janitor. Silence. Not because he lacked talent. Because our system decided 53 was too old. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Dmitry turned toward human resources. How many applicants over 50 do we reject every year? No answer. I asked a question. The HR director swallowed. Approximately 70%. Without interviews? Usually. My father quietly looked at the table. He wasn't angry. That somehow made the atmosphere even heavier. Dmitry continued. Starting today, that policy ends. Within weeks, Volkov International launched a nationwide employment initiative specifically for experienced workers over 50. Thousands applied. Hundreds were hired. Engineers, teachers, mechanics, bookkeepers, drivers, people who had spent years believing society no longer needed them. My father became the unexpected face of the campaign. He hated every interview. I don't like cameras. Dmitry laughed. They're not filming a celebrity. They're filming dignity. Still, my father insisted on one condition. No special treatment. I earned nothing. You earned everything, Dmitry answered. Papa simply shook his head. I helped one young man many years ago, and now you're helping thousands. Life slowly became brighter. I graduated from university exactly as my father had promised my mother. When I received my diploma, Papa cried before I did. He apologized. I thought I could hold it together. You already did, I whispered. Dmitry attended the ceremony without informing anyone. He sat quietly in the last row wearing a simple coat instead of one of his expensive suits. Afterward, he hugged my father. You kept your promise. Papa smiled toward the sky. I told Elena I would. For the first time in many years, I felt as though my mother had somehow witnessed everything. Months passed. My father never accepted an executive position despite Dmitry's repeated offers. Instead, he chose to become a mentor inside the company's training academy. Young employees adored him. He knew every cleaner by name, every receptionist, every security guard. He treated executives exactly the same way. Respect never depended on titles. One rainy evening, I found Dmitry sitting alone in the cafeteria. Not the executive dining room. The ordinary cafeteria. He was drinking tea from a paper cup. I sat across from him. You missed those factory days. He smiled without denying it. They were difficult, but simple. He looked toward my father laughing with several maintenance workers. I spent years believing success meant climbing higher. He sighed. Yesterday reminded me it means remembering who lifted you first. I understood then why seeing my father's name had frozen him. Success had never erased gratitude. It had only been waiting for the chance to express itself. Winter returned to Moscow. Snow covered the city once again. Almost exactly 1 year after that unforgettable application, Volkov International celebrated its anniversary. Thousands attended. Government officials, business leaders, employees from every department. The final speaker was unexpectedly announced. Ivan Nikolaevich Sokolov. My father looked horrified. You didn't tell me. Dmitry grinned. If I had, you would have refused. The audience laughed warmly. Papa slowly walked to the stage. He stood behind the microphone in complete silence for several seconds. I don't know how to give speeches. Everyone smiled. So I'll simply tell the truth. He looked around the enormous hall. When I applied here, I believed I was asking for work. His eyes found Dmitry. I didn't know life was giving me something else. He paused. Sometimes we think helping someone is a small thing. A lunch. A recommendation. A second chance. We forget. He smiled. The person we help continues living after we walk away. They carry that kindness into places we may never see. The hall became completely silent. I thought I had lost everything. My position. My savings. My confidence. He gently touched the old fountain pen still resting in his pocket. But kindness earns interest no bank can calculate. It returns when we least expect it. And sometimes, he looked at Dmitry again. It returns wearing a billionaire's suit. The audience burst into laughter before many quietly wiped away tears. Papa's voice softened. If you remember only one thing tonight, never measure people by the job they apply for. Measure them by the life they've lived. You never know whose future they once protected. Standing among thousands of people, I realized I had spent years believing I was proud because my father had sacrificed everything for me. But that wasn't the whole truth. I was proud because poverty had never stolen his character. Failure had never stolen his compassion. Rejection had never stolen his dignity. Those were treasures no economic crisis could touch. Later that night, after the celebration ended, we walked outside together. Snowflakes drifted quietly across Moscow. The city lights reflected on the frozen streets. Papa looked happier than I had seen in decades. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets. You know, Katya. What? I almost didn't submit that application. Why? I was embarrassed. I stopped walking. If you hadn't. He nodded. I know. Then he smiled. Life has strange timing. We continued toward the metro station instead of accepting the luxury car waiting nearby. That was my father's decision. We've ridden the metro our whole lives. No reason to stop now. Several passengers recognized him, not because he had become famous, but because they remembered his interviews encouraging older workers never to lose hope. An elderly man quietly approached. He removed his hat. Mr. Sokolov. Papa smiled. Yes. I found work again because of your story. His voice trembled. My granddaughter no longer worries about paying rent. He reached into his pocket and carefully handed Papa a tiny wooden angel. I carved this myself. Papa accepted it as though receiving priceless treasure. Thank you. The old man smiled. No. He shook his head. Thank you. After he left, my father stared at the little carving for a long time. Then he whispered something I will never forget. I wanted a job. Instead, he looked at the angel in his palm. I was given another purpose. Years have passed since that snowy morning when a single father walked into a billionaire's headquarters asking for nothing more than honest work with a mop and bucket. The application itself now hangs in a simple frame inside the company's leadership academy, not because it belonged to a billionaire, not because it changed corporate policy, but because it reminds every new employee that greatness is rarely recognized by appearances. Sometimes it arrives wearing a faded white shirt with repaired cuffs. Sometimes it carries an old fountain pen instead of an expensive watch. Sometimes it quietly writes 3 humble words on an application, ready to work. And sometimes those 3 words are enough to remind an entire nation that true wealth has never been measured by the office someone occupies, but by the lives they quietly transform when no one is watching. Whenever I pass that framed application, I smile. People stop to read my father's name without realizing I am his daughter. They admire the story. They discuss the billionaire who never forgot his mentor. But I always notice something different. I remember the man who came home every evening exhausted, cooked simple soup, checked my homework, repaired my winter boots with careful hands, and kissed my forehead before pretending everything would be all right, even when he had no idea how we would pay the next month's bills. The world eventually discovered Ivan Sokolov because a billionaire recognized his name. I was luckier. I recognized his worth long before anyone else did.